You know, people have often asked me, they said, gee, David, are you a naturally kind of organized guy? And I think about it and I go, not really. I mean, my life's a mess and falls apart regularly. But when I really thought about it, I thought, yeah, I was born thinking, how much easier can I make things? So, you know, I thought it was just ultimate laziness. Then I discovered they call it process improvement, and people, you know, pay money to have you talk about that. So, you know, my whole game was from the very beginning, how much easier can we make things happen? A little more practical answer to that was, after 35 professions, by the time I was 35, I figured, well, consultant or flake are the only two options. So I took the consulting route. And in my consulting practice, I needed help myself, and I just discovered a lot of the tools out there and a lot of the models about time management, personal organization, they all had good stuff, but nothing really cut it in terms of the people that I was working with and the kind of lifestyle that I lived. So a whole combination of things happened in the very early 80s. I mean, I was on, in one week, I bought an IBM XT and a Radio Shack Model 100 and was on to EasyLink with AT&T in 1983. So in one fell swoop, I sort of stepped into this world. And also, I'm a gear freak, and anything small, black, high-tech, and expensive I want. You know, later on I'll figure out if it actually does anything. But my buy-to-use ratio was probably 10 to 1 over time. So all those kind of factors all came together, and I just started putting things together. I thought I was the last guy in the world to figure this stuff out, because I really didn't have a lot of experience in the big corporate world. That only happened in the early 80s when Lockheed asked me to come in with some of the stuff I developed and help them design a seminar for this. But my background was with startups and friends of mine who had businesses, and you know, I was a good number 2 guy to come in and kind of help them figure out their process. And as I thought, if I got into the bigger corporate world and the more senior people that were certainly making a lot more money than me, they'd have already figured all this stuff out. Wrong. So it turns out that the higher up people got, the more responsibility they had, the more buried they were feeling, and the more they needed any simple little tool that would help them get rid of drag on their system so they could stay focused more. And as we all know, since the early 80s, the world was starting to happen a little faster and faster and faster for people. So anyway, this is a short version of a very, very, very long story, but that was the genesis of all this.
So how does it work? Can you describe the process in like 30 seconds or a minute?
Sure. Basically, you externalize any commitment you've got with yourself or anybody else. You then clarify exactly what that commitment means in terms of what's the outcome you're committed to and the action steps you need to take. You park the results of that defined work in some sort of intact system where you have very clean categories about what things mean, and they're parked in the appropriate places. You build in a good review, contemplative, reflective process on that whole inventory. You make sure you then are having the appropriate conversations in terms of purpose, vision, goals, areas of responsibility, projects, and all the actions required on some consistent basis. So then you trust your heart or your gut or the seat of your pants or whatever you trust about your choices about what you actually do. That's GTD. That's what it's about.
Pretty easy, right? So if I kind of paraphrase, you take everything that's in your head, you put it in a gigantic task list, and then you just follow the tasks.
Basically what you want to do is offload the core processor's responsibility to remember and remind. The core processor in your mind cannot multitask. People call it multitasking. Well, multitasking is what happens when you drive home and you wonder who drove, right? When some unconscious or relatively unconscious part of you, we're all pumping blood and breathing and stuff. There's all kinds of multitasking going on right here. But for the brain to consciously, creatively, concentratedly focus on more than one thing at a time is impossible. Impossible. It can do one thing very well. Your brain walks into here and it can see patterns here that the computer still can't even come close to doing. Not even close. Right? So we have a huge, huge computer sitting inside of ourselves that has infinite power, or at least almost relative to anything we've seen so far in terms of what the computer could match. However, what the brain cannot do very well is then take one person and think very creatively, how am I going to manage that relationship, deepen that relationship, be creative about that, and then do 2 people at the same time. Can't do it. Cannot do it. So what the brain can do is focus on one thing at a time very, very powerfully, but not 2. The problem is, if you're not tracking the agreements about something here, anywhere else, your mind has to have it. It cannot let it go. I mean, you can fool me, but you can't fool your own head. It absolutely knows whether or not you've got placeholders in appropriate places systemically for any of your commitments. If you don't, it has it back. And it'll wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Hey, David, you need to, and it's this monkey on your back. And basically what you did was you gave the core processor in there the job of doing something it doesn't actually do very well. It can make the decisions. Matter of fact, your system can't make the decisions for you. That's probably a lot of what we'll maybe talk about here. But once it's made the decision, then having a systemic way to put placeholders on those things so that then it frees itself up. So essentially, it's possible to be buried and have nothing on your mind. Actually, you can't have nothing on your mind if you're conscious. But if the only thing that's on your mind is truly the only thing on your mind, then you're in your zone.